All right, so are psychedelics the real deal when it comes to healing trauma, or are we just seeing a placebo effect in action? We've got some research and some personal stories you guys sent us, so let's dive in and see what we can uncover.
It's a really hot topic, and for so long the focus has been on talking about the trauma. But one of the things you sent, the body keeps the score, it suggests that maybe the body itself holds the key.
That's interesting. What does it say about the body and trauma?
It really highlights that trauma isn't just something you think about, it gets into your physiology.
Oh, wow.
It calls it the body as a battlefield.
Ooh, that's a powerful image.
Because your physical being is like a battleground where the effects of the trauma are constantly being replayed.
It's not just the memory, it's how your body reacts even years later.
Exactly, and the book has some really striking examples. Like there's a woman who couldn't make eye contact.
Really?
She felt so much self-disgust from her trauma. And there's another one about a man who had flashbacks so intense that brain scans showed his amygdala, that's the fear center of the brain, right?
Sure.
It was reacting as if the event was happening all over again.
So his body was reliving it even though he knew he was safe.
And that really shows the limits of talk therapy. The body keeps the score argues that we need to go beyond just talking. And find ways to engage the emotional brain, especially the limbic system. That's where these really deep responses live.
And that's where psychedelics come in. Do they work on that level?
That's what some researchers think. The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide that you sent talks about LSD, psilocybin, and MDMA and how they might actually be catalysts for healing trauma.
I have to admit, when I first heard about using psychedelics in therapy, it sounded kind of out there.
Yeah.
But the more I learn about it, the more it makes sense, especially if we're talking about breaking those really deep-seated patterns that maybe talk therapy can't quite reach.
And the guide has all these stories that back that up. People overcoming addiction, PTSD, and even experiencing really deep personal growth.
Through psychedelic sessions?
Yeah, like there's this one about an architect.
Uh-huh.
He was on LSD, and he was suddenly able to solve this complex design problem that he'd been stuck on for months.
Wow, so it's not just processing trauma. Maybe it unlocks creativity, too.
It seems that way. But, it's really important to remember that healing trauma is a holistic thing.
Yeah.
It's not about taking a pill. It's about integrating your mind and body, finding ways to handle those big emotions, and rediscovering who you are.
Right, it takes more than one approach.
Exactly. And while psychedelics seem to have a lot of potential, we can't forget that they're not a magic bullet. The guide is really big on responsible use, proper guidance, and integration. And it also talks about the risks of using them the wrong way, like challenging psychological experiences and the need for being really prepared and having support.
So you've got to be careful.
Absolutely. And the body keeps the score. It adds another layer to this whole thing. It says that trauma doesn't just exist on its own. It affects everyone around you, too.
It becomes a shared experience.
Exactly. It shakes relationships and even how we see the world. Does the body keeps the score talk about healing on that bigger level? It does. It talks about collective trauma like war or oppression and how communities can heal through things like sharing their stories, rituals, acknowledging how connected we all are.
Wow, so it's like recognizing that we've all been hurt and finding ways to heal together.
Exactly. It's really interesting how the individual and the collective levels of trauma kind of play off each other. And as we're looking at how psychedelics might rewire the brain, the body keeps the score, it actually explains a bit about how our brains process trauma in the first place.
Yeah, I thought that part was really helpful. It explains how our brains react to danger signals, and that makes it easier to understand how trauma gets stuck.
Right. It talks about how those signals go through the thalamus first. That's like the sensory control center. It blends all the input from our senses, and then the signals go down two paths. The low road, which is like a fast track to the amygdala, which triggers that immediate fear response, and the high road, which sends the info to the frontal lobes for more conscious processing.
But for people who've experienced trauma, the book says that process can get messed up.
Yeah, it's like the thalamus can't integrate the sensory information properly, and it ends up fragmented. They use the example of Stan, who was in a car crash.
Oh, right.
The sights, the sounds, the sensations of the crash, they weren't processed as one memory.
Wow.
They stayed as these separate pieces, and that caused him to relive the trauma through flashbacks.
So even though the crash is over, his body is still reacting like the danger's right there? That must be so exhausting.
Absolutely, and his brain scans showed that his amygdala was super active. Like the car crash was happening right then, even though he was safe in the scanner.
That's wild. It shows just how deep those trauma responses go.
So how do psychedelics change that? Do they disrupt these pathways somehow?
That's a good question.
This is where the research is still kind of figuring things out, but there are some interesting theories. One is that psychedelics might turn down the activity in the amygdala,
Okay.
and that could let those fragmented memories get processed without triggering that huge fear response.
So it gives the brain a chance to reintegrate those memories in a safer way.
Exactly, and some researchers think that this could also boost neuroplasticity.
What was neuroplasticity again?
Oh, it's just the brain's ability to change and make new connections. It's like the brain is always remodeling itself.
Right, so if psychedelics make that happen, they're giving the brain a chance to create healthier pathways.
That's the idea, and the body keeps the score is really big on this idea of reconnecting with the body, too.
Because trauma can make people disconnect from their bodies.
Exactly. People might start ignoring their gut feelings, numbing themselves to physical sensations. They basically become strangers to their own bodies.
If you're always on edge from trauma, it's hard to be present in your body.
And a lot of people say that psychedelics actually make them more aware of their senses. Like they're more in tune with the little sensations and signals our bodies are sending.
So it's like coming back to your body after being away for a while.
And that's huge because without that, it's tough to feel safe, grounded, connected to yourself and the world.
It sounds like it changes how you see yourself.
It can, and there's another piece of the puzzle we need to talk about, the impact of trauma on relationships.
You mean how it makes it hard to connect with people?
Exactly. The Body Keeps the Score talks about how our early experiences, especially with our caregivers, shape how we attach to others.
And those patterns can stick with us.
Yeah, they affect our relationships and even how we see ourselves. The book talks about a study where researchers watched mothers and babies.
Okay.
And they grouped them by their attachment styles. The babies who showed what they called disorganized attachment, often because of inconsistent or scary caregiving.
That's sad.
They had a harder time controlling their emotions and feeling secure in relationships.
It's like they learn that the world is unpredictable and people can't be trusted.
And those defenses, they make sense at the time, but they can really get in the way of intimacy later on.
So can psychedelics help with those kinds of wounds?
We need more research on that, for sure. But there are stories of people who felt more empathy and compassion for themselves and others after using psychedelics.
So it's not just working through your own pain, it's opening up to others too.
Yeah, even people who have hurt us in the past. And that can be super healing, especially for people who've been isolated or had a hard time in trusting others.
Like it rewires the brain for connection.
I like that. And The Body Keeps the Score reminds us that healing from trauma isn't just about you, it's about all of us.
Right, we talked about collective trauma and how it can hurt whole generations.
Exactly. It's a shared wound that we need to address as a society. The book talks about the importance of creating spaces where people can tell their stories, have rituals, and recognize how interconnected we are.
So while we're looking at how psychedelics can help individuals, we also need to think about the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Maybe by addressing trauma on both those levels, we can make the world a kinder, more resilient place.
It's been a fascinating conversation, and we've been focusing on how psychedelics could help heal trauma. But we need to talk about the risks too, right?
Oh, definitely. The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, it spends a lot of time on responsible use and how important preparation and integration are. It says that just taking a psychedelic without the right support can actually be harmful.
So it's not a quick fix. What makes for a safe and beneficial experience?
Well, the guide talks about set and setting.
Okay.
Set is your mindset going in, your intentions, your expectations, and setting is the environment you're in.
I see. So if you're going into it with a lot of emotional baggage or in a place that feels unsafe, it could go badly.
Yeah, it's like opening a door to your subconscious without knowing what's there. And the guide also stresses having a trained guide with you.
Like a therapist.
Yeah, someone who can support you, reassure you, and help you deal with any difficult emotions that come up.
It's like having a guide through your own mind.
Exactly, and immigration is just as important. What happens afterwards, how you process the experience, what's key.
It's not over when the session ends.
Right, it's about thinking about the insights and emotions you had, connecting them to your life, and actually living those insights. And that can be really hard, especially with trauma. It's so important to have support from friends, family therapists who can help you understand it all.
It's a delicate balance, exploring these deep parts of yourself and then bringing those experiences back into your everyday life.
Yeah, and the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide warns against using psychedelics to just escape from difficult emotions. That's not the point.
It's about facing them head on.
Right. Healing from trauma is deep work. It takes commitment, patience, and a willingness to really look at the hard stuff. It's a journey, not a destination.
That's a good way to put it. And it reminds me of something we talked about before. Everyone's journey is different.
Absolutely. What works for one person might not work for another, and that's okay.
So it's about finding the right approaches for you, whether that's therapy bodywork support groups, or maybe exploring psychedelics with a professional.
Exactly, and we're still learning so much about psychedelics and how they work. There's a lot more research to be done.
It's exciting, but we need to be careful and make sure we're using them safely and responsibly.
I think the most important thing to remember is that healing is possible. Trauma can hurt us deeply, but it doesn't have to control us. There are ways to heal, and with the right help, you can reclaim your life and feel whole again.
I love that. And it's okay to ask for help. Talking to a therapist, joining a support group, or just leaning on your loved ones can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. You are not your trauma. You are a survivor, and you have the strengths to heal.
This has been a really insightful look at psychedelics and trauma. We hope it's given you some new perspectives and a sense of hope on your own healing journey.